Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Joint Special Operations University's Future of Special Operations Forum, where we are focused on the fourth age of SOF. I am Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Faint, your host, and on behalf of General Richard Clark, the Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, and Dr. Ike Wilson, the President of Joint Special Operations University, it's my pleasure to welcome you back for Day 2. In case you missed Day 1, the JSOU mission is to prepare SOF professionals to address strategic and operational challenges, arming them with the ability to think through problems with knowledge, insight, and foresight. In accordance with this mission, JSOU regularly conducts events like this one, focused on matters relating to the use and utility of special operations forces in a competitive global environment with highly complex, complicated, intersectional, and compound security challenges. This forum is titled The Fourth Age of SOF, Use and Utility of Special Operations in a New Age, and is inspired by the monograph of the same name that was recently released by Special Operations University. In this event, which features discussions about the first 3 ages of SOF, we will also hear predictions about SOF's emerging fourth age. During Day 1, we examined the ages of SOF from a historical perspective, discussed how the 3 previous ages impact preparation for and success in the fourth age, covered ways to create complexity for current and potential rivals, and explored how to understand and counter irregular adversaries. Yesterday also featured pre-recorded commentary from the Commander of Special Operations Command and a scene-setter discussion with the President of Joint Special Operations University and our Command Sergeant Major. During Day 2, we will open with a discussion about what makes a SOF professional, and then delve into a discussion about SOF education, authorities, doctrine, and special challenges. This afternoon's panels will feature topics including SOF's role in establishing and maintaining partnerships and integrated defense, as well as active campaigning in the gray zone. Day 2 also features an interview with a SOF operator who recently participated in an overseas operation that ties together the 3 previous ages of SOF and gives insights into SOF's emerging fourth age. The forum will then conclude with final remarks from Dr. Wilson. Just like we did yesterday, today we have an exciting and eclectic group of panelists representing joint, interagency, intergovernmental, multinational, and commercial organizations, as well as the breadth of academia. We have an equally diverse group of participants representing numerous commands, agencies, think tanks, and academic institutions from all parts of the globe. And in recognition of the fifth SOF truth that most SOF operations require non-SOF support, many of our panelists are from outside the SOF community. Before we begin, I would like to reiterate some administrative points. First, this forum is being conducted at the unclassified level. All materials presented and discussions conducted must be unclassified. Second, this event is being recorded for future use. Your participation in this forum is consent for recording. Third, the opinions in this forum are those of the presenters and may not necessarily be those of U.S. government, Department of Defense, United States Special Operations Command, Joint Special Operations University, or any other person or entity. Fourth, we look forward to and encourage audience participation and feedback. Throughout the forum, you can submit your comments and questions via the chat function. Please preface your question with the #Q, and we have moderators and other personnel who can assist you in getting your questions answered and out to the panelists. We're also interested in gathering your input on the individual sessions and ask that you take a few minutes between panels, during lunch, or at the end of the day to provide your feedback. This can be done by scanning the session feedback QR code displayed on the scrolling slides with a smartphone or a tablet, or by clicking on the survey link posted in the chat. After the forum concludes, you will receive an email invitation to provide your assessment of the overall event. JSOU will use the information you provide to refine our Future of SOF Forum series. We thank you in advance for your participation in the feedback. Fifth, we've developed a library guide of resources that complement the forum topical areas. You can access it at the link that we will post in the chat box. Sixth, please visit the JSOU YouTube channel for access to the recorded content from this forum and other JSOU educational events. You go to YouTube and search for Think JSOU. Finally, in the event of technical difficulties, such as losing the broadcast feed, please keep the event access information nearby should you need it to log back in. Please note that the Vimeo login requirements are the same for both days of the forum. We will begin today's panels with a discussion on the broad topic of what makes a SOF professional. This panel is moderated by Lieutenant Colonel Mike Kelvington, a Princeton graduate and longtime member of the U.S. Army's Ranger Regiment, who currently serves as a professor of military science at The Ohio State University. Mike, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Charlie, and good morning. Coming at you from Columbus, Ohio. I appreciate the invite here to moderate. My brother is a Navy commander and a Naval Academy graduate that currently works in the CAG at Southcom. We were talking this weekend, and my brother asked me, "Is it possible that the people in the Army right now could talk about anything other than a PT test?" So I'm going to go on the record this morning that we're talking about something other than that, although I did take one this morning with my cadets before we kicked this off. So I just wanted to start off with a couple things real quick before we do the intros and the bios of the folks that are here. One is just to baseline everybody. So just to give you a little bit of Army doctrine and little cadet command curriculum here, just wanted to talk what is a professional. And perhaps that can at least anchor our discussion this morning. And if those disagree, we can certainly have that discussion as well. But ADP 6-22 says professionals accept the responsibility to be stewards of the people and resources entrusted to them by society and to advance the state of their profession in anticipation of changes to the world around them. Professions motivate their members to answer a calling to honorable service, to pursue lifelong learning, and to cooperate as members with a common purpose higher than individual gratification. A calling or vocation means that the mission is more important than the individual is, which is the basis of sacrifice. And then just real quick, I thought it was really interesting the portion of the Fourth Age of SOF publication that we had from JSOU by Dr. Wilson and Mr. Irwin. There's a section towards the back called Lessons Gathered, but Not Yet Learned. And so if you overlay what a profession is by constantly trying to make things better and being a steward of the profession, just wanted to share, there's a quick paragraph. It says, the potential impact of SOF's utility in strategic competition will demand, as it always has, anticipating, finding, and creating ways and opportunities that allow the U.S. and its allies and partners to do two things simultaneously: bend the escalation curve of competition and conflict downwards by lowering the amplitude of contests of force and power, and extend the spaces in between lost moments of relative peace and the next great power war, or more importantly, deterring and preventing the next great power war from happening at all. The fourth age of SOF will demand a return to the paradigm that empowers SOF as sentinel, preparing the environment as the frontline ambassadors of the joint force and as the first 3 feet employed in any competition or confrontation zone. And if done so in proper ways and for proper reason, SOF as the frontline vanguard indication and warning system will enable conditions that prevent the need for a last 3 feet use of force. So just as an introduction, just wanted to baseline everybody on at least a definition of what a professional is, what a professional should do, and some of the challenges that we're looking at here as SOF professionals. So speaking of SOF professionals, the panel that we have for this morning is an extremely talented group of folks. First, I'll introduce Lieutenant Colonel Ken Segelhorst. He's a U.S. Army Special Forces officer and information operations practitioner, currently assigned to the Simon Center for the Professional Military Ethic at West Point, and he's the course director for MX 400, fairly new course on officership. It's the capstone course for the SOUP. In his previous assignments, he served in Joint Information Operations Center and cross-functional team leader in JSOU, and his operational experience includes numerous deployments to the Middle East and Africa. Ken's interagency experience includes assignments to U.S. embassies in Baghdad, Iraq, in Central African Republic, and is also a non-resident fellow with the Simon Center for Ethical Leadership and Interagency Cooperation. Mayor James Gagliano, recently elected, is serving his first term as after serving his first term as a village trustee locally there near West Point. And his professional pursuits include serving as a law enforcement analyst and policing methodology subject matter expert in the media, where he provides on-air analysis of complex law enforcement and counterterror matters, an adjunct assistant professor and doctoral candidate at St. John's University in Queens, New York. He's a sought-after speaker on criminal justice, homeland security, police use of force, and organizational leadership matters. He's a 1987 West Point graduate, so a couple years before me, and was commissioned as an infantry officer, served in 10th Mountain, stationed at Fort Benning, Fort Drum, between 88 and 91, and has a master's in Homeland Security, Criminal Justice Leadership from St. John's. Next, we have Dr. Kari Thyne, served in the U.S. Air Force for 20 years as an aircraft maintenance and munitions officer. Her experience includes command of a C-5 aircraft maintenance squadron at Dover, Delaware, before and after 9/11, as well as a shop and flight line aircraft maintenance experience with C-130s and C-141 aircraft. She's also a conventional munitions maintenance flight commander and munitions accountability supply officer for the Air Force's largest conventional munitions stockpile. She served in the Pentagon on the Air Staff, Joint Staff, and immediate office of the 16th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She's recently worked in the RAND Corporation's Washington office supporting Project Air Force's strategy and doctrine program. Dr. Thyne taught biomedical ethics and formal logic at the Northern Virginia Community College Annandale campus and military ethics at the U.S. Air Force Academy. She holds a Doctorate of Liberal Studies from Georgetown University, a Master of Arts in Philosophy from The Ohio State University, a Master of Science in Educational Leadership from Troy State, and a Bachelor from the Air Force Academy. And then last but not least, Sergeant Major Timo Braese. Sergeant Major Braese was born in 72 and is a native of Württemberg, Germany. He enlisted in the German Army in 1991 as an infantryman. Sergeant Major Braese has served in all leadership positions from team leader to platoon leader of a Ranger Assault Platoon. He was appointed as Sergeant Major of the German Armed Forces on 1st of January 2015 and continues to serve today. His last assignment with the 3rd EGB 31st Airborne Regiment SOF, and he has served as the Operations Sergeant Major for that unit. So that's the lineup we have this morning. And for the first question, I'm going to hand it over to Lieutenant Colonel Ken Segelhorst. So Ken, you work at the Simon Center for the Professional Military Ethic at West Point. In what ways can commissioning sources like West Point and Reserve Officer Training Corps prepare future leaders for a career in special operations?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to JSOU for inviting me to participate today. So with regard to the commissioning foreign culture, if you will, that military culture that we've established, but transitioning them not only to that culture, but transitioning and certifying them to be leaders within that enterprise, within that organization. So when we take these individuals in, we're working to develop them across really the Army doctrine has 4 fields of military expertise, right? We're trying to train them with regard to military technical, geocultural, and political. We're training them to be leaders and develop others, and then also trying to establish this moral ethical baseline as well. So we're trying to develop them across all 4 of these fields of military expertise during that, whether it be the 47-month, West Point experience, or even, consolidated timeline with regard to ROTC, and some individuals doing a green to gold program or a 2-year program there. And it's a lot to take in, but we're establishing that baseline for them to continue to grow and develop. Now, ultimately, when we're commissioning these individuals as second lieutenants, what we've done is we've certified them as professionals, that baseline level within the profession of arms. And we're doing that based on character, competence, and commitment. And of all those things that we do at the commissioning sources, I feel like character is probably the most important one, right? We can continue to train competence after an individual is commissioned. And we have tons of courses out there, whether it be training or professional military education, that continues to develop that competence throughout an individual's career. However, character, we don't have as much formal education and training on that integrated throughout professional military education. And it's much more difficult to train and to educate with regard to character. So I think that is one of those areas in which the commissioning sources need to play that vital role as we prepare leaders to go out and to take leadership roles within their service organization, and then also preparing them for a career in special operations. And I would argue that is entirely essential for careers in special operations, because we're putting people in special operations into very complex, kind of gray zone environments in which there is some level of moral ambiguity. And we need to make sure that the leaders that we have out there leading our special operations forces are of the utmost, with regard to character and personal character. So that way they are making those right decisions. And sometimes, quite frequently, we would like to tell the cadets, you're going to be placed in situations in which there is no, clearly right or wrong or clearly easy decision. But by preparing them and giving them the tools prior to commissioning, I think that we're definitely helping prepare them for that career in SOF down the road as young professionals.
Hey, thanks, Ken. And I think, just one follow-up question for you. I think one of the things I did with our cadets here was had them read the book Team of Teams by General McChrystal in the fall. The 2028 operational plan from General Davis for for ROTC, and I'm sure with the cyber center and everything that's going on up at West Point, you're seeing some similar things. He talks about developing commissioned leaders of character, and in his vision, he talks about developing innovative second lieutenants. So could you speak a little bit to what's going on up at West Point when it comes to developing lieutenants that are not just leaders of character, but also layered with the moral ethical, on top of that, the innovation, critical thinking, and the ability to be agile, adaptable. So when you're put into those unknown predicaments in the gray zone, that they will be successful.
No, that's a great question, Mike. And I agree. We have to, it goes beyond just character education, but being able to take and operate within very complex environments. I think, liberal arts education that is offered here at the United States Military Academy and several other institutions really helps provide some greater understanding. So whether it be language and cultural training and classes as part of the baseline or the core curriculum, but then also applying the lessons that they've learned here to complex situations. And if you look back at the last several years, we've really been able to take core curriculum here at West Point and apply it to things that have been happening in the world, whether it be civil unrest throughout the nation, situations in the Capitol post-election, the pullout of Afghanistan, and complex situations that we're currently observing within Ukraine, and being able to apply that education that they're receiving here to those situations and encourage them to apply some of that critical thinking. Critical thinking is one of those things that frequently we talk about as educators. Well, you need to think critically. You need to apply critical thinking, but how often do we actually, examine? How often do we actually educate people on what exactly is critical thinking and taking that time to do it? But we try to emphasize the complexity of the operating environment. And we've read here at the Academy, some work by McMaster and other individuals that have expressed and looked at the future operating environment, how complex it's going to be, and how we're going to have to exercise a certain level of mission command. We have to empower subordinates. We have to enable them to understand what the commander's intent is and execute based on disciplined initiative. And I think, we're teaching that to young second lieutenants to let them know, like, we're going to have to trust you, and you're going to have to go forth and do things. You're not going to be able to reach out and ask that company commander exactly how they want things done. We're going to trust and empower you to go forward. And that's really what we've been doing with special operations since its inception. is empowering those small elite teams to go out there with very little instruction and just baseline intent and go forth and do what needs to be done. And I think we're able to do that with special operations forces based on the high level of competence and trust that those forces have established. But it's not just going to be special operations. In this case, it's going to be young second lieutenants and first lieutenants in the conventional fight. If we go to a near peer threat like we're currently observing, the conflict in Ukraine.
That's great, Ken. Thank you. Just wanted to remind our audience too that the chat box here, if you have questions as we're rolling through, we'll go ahead and make sure that we include those as we continue the conversation. I think Ken, you highlighted a really great point on the complexity, trying to help young cadets, soon to be lieutenants, understand the different layers, and then the second and third order impacts to some of their decision making is extremely important. And then really, higher up, in the last 20 years, I guess in the third age of SOF, we've built this massive super jocks, and being able to stare at platoons through soda straws with owning airspace dominance, and you get 2 stars being able to maneuver small units around the battlefield just by keying a hand mic on a laptop. And so you've created this environment where I think mission command can be extremely challenging. And so I think across the board, whether it's the youngest lieutenant or all of us as members of the profession, that trust and empowerment has to be delegated down in order for us to be successful in the future. So I think that's a great point that you just teased out. Next question, moving over to Mayor Gagliano. You supported special operations overseas during your time after your time in uniform was over. What advice do you have for SOF professionals who want to follow in your footsteps in terms of finding that second mission after military service ends?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Mike. I almost feel like you had to have one politician on this panel because you've got this august body and you just needed some light humor or some comedic relief. But I'm truly privileged and humbled to join you folks, and I hope I can shed a little bit of light on how people can move on from the military after service in special operations, and how that can apply to the career that I had in the FBI. And it's interesting, you just mentioned, General McChrystal and Team of Teams. And I think one of the things in that book that really resonated for me was how he looked at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, and how, this naval battle was conducted for centuries, boats lined up in a linear battlefield, kind of like, troops in World War II, going back as far as the Civil War. And the interesting thing was the adoption, which I think special forces and special operations have really brought to the forefront of understanding the complexities of asymmetrical warfare and understanding the blurring of lines when you're dealing with counterinsurgencies. And that's kind of where the blending of the FBI in its role as a law enforcement investigative entity and DOD and what your mission is overseas. And I think my first exposure to that was probably when I was in the FBI and I was assigned to the hostage rescue team, HRT, which is our country's only domestic counterterrorism tier 1 asset. And back in that time, the late 90s, when I was on the team, deploying to Kosovo when there were charges of war crimes and atrocities. And then the USS Cole getting bombed, a US warship in international waters at the port of Aden in Yemen, and HRT responding to take control of the crime scene because that warship is US soil. And then moving into 9/11. And on 9/11, I had just left the team and I deployed back to the New York City office of the FBI. And then, of course, our world changed and everything changed. It changed for the military. It certainly changed for the FBI. One of the things that we were asked to do, I spent 4 years in the United States Army, and the furthest I ever deployed was Fort Chaffee, Arkansas for JRTC. I get into the FBI and all of a sudden I find myself thrust into the global war on terrorism, because as we were working through things during the early stages of the war, 2001, at the end of the year, 2002, 2003, we were trying to see where all these different things fit. We are fighting enemy combatants, but we are also fighting terrorists, and the rules are vastly different. So in doing so, the FBI needed to have people that they could attach to a SEAL team, or attach to, you know, the Rangers, or attach to Delta, to do things regarding, you know, picking up high value targets and how we interfaced with them. And obviously keeping this at an unclassified level, one of the things that FBI agents, specifically the HRT operators that were assigned to those units, was interrogations, how to conduct interviews, often doing it through terps. So, you know, you're speaking, you know, in Urdu, Pashto, Arabic, things like that, but doing it through an interpreter. Collecting fingerprints of either bodies or live personnel that were rolled up on the battlefield. And then something that was pretty nascent at the time, DNA collection. And since the FBI is intimately involved in having a national laboratory that does all that testing, and how that was integrated. So you needed those FBI skill sets, those law enforcement skill sets, but you also needed people that could jump out of an airplane, fast rope, keep up with the snake eaters that were out there, you know, moving, because the battlefield is complex and the battlefield is asymmetrical and all of that. So I'll wrap this up by answering the question that you posited, which is, what is available for folks that have spent a career in special forces, or have spent a career in special operations? The FBI adapted about a decade ago, so probably 10 years into the war, adapted its recruitment program involving people with the kind of skill sets that special operators have. So if special operators wanted to leave the Army, and some of them could do it by retiring and still being young enough to get into the FBI, if they did that, where could they go? And if they wanted to kind of be on the tip of the spear and still kind of use some of those skill sets that they learned and honed after multiple deployments overseas, they have a tactical recruitment program, TRP, and anybody can go to FBIjobs.gov. I'm not here to be a shill for the FBI, but I am here to be a shill for HRT, because folks in your profession, and since we are talking about professionals that want to get into the civilian counterterrorism operational end of things, they can apply to the FBI, and then they will be interviewed by current onboard HRT operators. They will have their file pulled aside. They'll still have to go through the normal process to get into Quantico and to go through the FBI Academy, because you do have to be an investigator first, but you are earmarked within that first year of being sent to selection. Now, the FBI's HRT selection, it is robust and rigorous. I'm not going to pretend it's like Ranger School or BUDS or, you know, Delta Selection or SFOT. I'm not going to pretend that, because it's only 2 weeks long. But because the original plank holders of HRT back in 1983 were former SEALs and former Vietnam vets and former Rangers and former, you know, special ops guys, there's a little bit of each of those different crucibles, each of those different selection processes built into that 2 weeks. So you'd still have to go through that. You'd still have to qualify with the sidearm, with the M4, with the, you know, MP10, the weapons that are the tools of the HRT counterterror operators. You'd still have to get selected for the team physically, shooting aptitude wise, and mental capacity, psychologically speaking, to make sure that you're a good fit. It's a 52-man team. And I say man, not that women cannot try out, they have in the past, but to date, it is still a male-dominated team. There are 52 spots. And if you go this tactical recruitment process, you can get to the front of the line as far as trying out and getting selected and not have to wait the obligatory. I waited 7 years before I tried out when I was in the FBI. Now there's a fast track way, so the people still that have those skill sets, before they lose those skill sets, as more and more time is there's a bigger gap between actually doing those things and then, you know, getting an opportunity to go to HRT. So I'll wrap this up, Mike, by saying FBIjobs.gov. You go there, you go to the tactical recruitment program. And then there's some frequently asked questions there that you can find the answers to. And I will always be available. You can find me either on Twitter or through my email, which is public. Could certainly be a conduit to anybody that had any questions about it. But that is the way that if you still want to stay in the fight, it is a different mission, but there is a lot of synergy to it, to what you've done over in the sandbox previously. That's the way to do it.
Hey, thanks, James. Great comments. And, I won't counter with telling people they can check out the Army ROTC at Ohio State website. But I think it's great. One of the things that you highlighted when you talked about second mission, and talking to a lot of folks as I, contemplate at some point my own transition as a professional, within the profession of arms. I do think that there's folks that transition that still have a lot left in the tank to give. And talking to folks that struggle with the transition is often, they're doing it for the right reasons, but when it comes to, work, they lose that purpose that they had when they were wearing a uniform. Can you speak a little bit to that and the importance it was to you, where you found it, and other routes that people can take to find that purpose in their second mission?
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question. Look, you're never going to replicate the bonds that are forged in combat. You're just not. So to anticipate that you're going to have that band of brothers, or that band of brothers and sisters, that collegial group that is part of a profession and a mission, and you count on each other daily in life and death scenarios, you're not going to be able to replicate that. You are going to have the closest thing possible to that, to being able to make that departure from the military and move into the civilian specter. You'll have something as close to that as possible. It won't be the same, but there are a number of folks, and I've met them, that, served multiple tours over during the early stages of the global war on terrorism, and even back 10 years ago and 5 years ago, that have come into the FBI, and they have found that common cause. They found that being part of something bigger than yourself. And they found that in extremis mission, meaning, you're going to be put into situations that are dangerous, whether it's a rendition overseas, or whether it's a high-risk barricaded subject arrest. I mean, we've lost a number of operators. I don't want to say thankfully, because you lost them through training exercises. One fast roping on a ship underway out in Chesapeake, lost 2 operators about 10 years ago. Lost one during a training mission out on a military range in Virginia, ended up getting shot. We have lost canines in actual conduct of operations, but you will definitely go into harm's way. And for a lot of us, when you lose that sense of heightened sensory that comes with being shot at, or that comes with, being in danger, and finding some type of duplicative mission that makes you feel like when you get up in the morning and go to work, you have a reason. I mean, everybody's job is important, but you started this off by delineating what a profession is. And I believe, having been on those sides and worked with, special operators and worked on the HRT side, it is the closest transition, or the easiest transition you're going to make, even though it is absolutely not the same. And look, a lot of folks that are coming back with PTSD and psychological issues and things like that, we take that seriously as well in the FBI. We've lost SWAT operators, and we've had, people that struggle to reconcile things that they did on the job. So there is a much better awareness of that on the mental health end. There are support groups. And like I said, I'd probably guess that right now, of the team of 52 members, probably 10 of them are former military folks that served on multiple deployments and came in through this tactical recruitment program.
Hey, thanks, James. I appreciate that. I think the fast roping accident you're referring to, one of the operators was Chris Lorick.
Yes.
Who was actually, I served with him overseas. He was on my manifest numerous times, and I'll just tell you, the enablers that we had overseas, you could never discount their capabilities. And so when you had to make cuts, it was usually a Ranger before it was an enabler coming off the manifest if you had weight issues or capacity issues with aircraft. But I appreciate you highlighting that. I think it's extremely important. And you know, people find purpose in their second mission in a lot of different things. I think you just highlighted a great segue for folks going into the law enforcement profession. I know people find it in you know, customs and border control, and others that, you know, view their lifestyle in the military as you know, taking life and destroying things, and you know, start a farm and they grow and create things, and that's how they find their purpose. But I appreciate you highlighting that. Extremely important. I got one additional follow-up question for you. I think it's you're actually your first recruit for the FBI. It's a question from a fellow panelist, Sergeant Major Braese. He says, "Hey, with a possible background check, would an international with qualifications with certain prerequisites be able to work as a civilian within the world of SOF for the U.S.?" So you might have your first recruit on the website here soon. But anything to opine there?
Yeah, that's I mean, you pointed out earlier, you know, in the community, in this community, it's a very tight-knit community, and everybody knows everybody, and that's not just domestically, that's also internationally. And the amount of training missions that we conduct with our counterparts, whether it's GSG-9 or the Mossad or the Australians, and you know, the Italians, and then also the opportunities when you're overseas, whether it's in a place like, you know, Kosovo, where war crimes are being committed and NATO troops are over there. But yes, that coalescing of international, you know, freedom fighters and folks in this community is extremely important. And I think the you can boil it down to two things. It's lessons learned and best practices. And the Army loves acronyms. And I, of course, I use them all the time, ones that I learned at the Academy in the late 80s, but things like AARs and best practices, lessons learned. You know, every operation that's conducted by the Australians or by the Germans or by the Israelis, there are lessons to be learned from that. So we don't want to make the same mistakes twice. And there's no better way to learn things than from the folks that have actually done it. So yes, I think it's critical that we have these relationships. I imagine as borders shift and as you know, globalism becomes a bigger reality in the 21st century with technology, and obviously with, you know, with what we're seeing right now with Russia and Ukraine, the fact that, you know, good and decent nations need to work together, and this community being so technically and tactically proficient, and such a small amount of people that are actually doing it. Yes, just like the FBI has to work with state and local partners to get things done post 9/11, I think you'll see the same thing in the special ops side.
Awesome. Well, Mayor Gagliano, thank you. We'll move on to Dr. Thyne. So you recently partnered with one of your JSOU colleagues on a project involving SOF ethical considerations. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project and what implications you found for the evolving concept of SOF as a profession?
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me, and I have enjoyed listening to my fellow panelists and learning. So I look forward to continuing throughout the day. A couple of years ago, when General Clark and Chief Smith released the results of the comprehensive review, Dr. Joe Long and I, Dr. Long is a retired Green Beret, found some fellow travelers, a community of interest, if you will, with retired CSM John Labuse and Sergeant Major Chris Hughes in the Enlisted Academy. And we as educators wanted to know how we could contribute to being part of the solution to the problems identified in the comprehensive review. Because education, as we know, but to remind everyone, education is also leadership. So this was an opportunity for those of us who had served and for those of us who remain passionate supporters of the SOF enterprise to make a contribution or to see if we could make a contribution. So a characteristic of a profession is that professions must earn and keep the trust of the communities they serve. So they do that through the establishment of an ethic or an ethos, which those words mean a system of values. So we started to look at what SOF values might be, and how that might inform solutions to the problems identified in the comprehensive review. We try to be humble, despite being educators. We try to be humble and recognize that we don't have the answers to all the questions, and we don't have to solve all the problems ourselves. So we went back into the philosophical tradition, because after all, everything is a footnote to Plato. So we started with Plato and Aristotle, and we were looking for that ethical foundation to build our solution or our course of education upon. And we found it. We found and started re-looking at the characteristics identified by the ancient Greeks on into the Renaissance by philosophers like Machiavelli, and then forward to John Locke in 17th century England. And we reminded ourselves what the characteristics were of human nature. And one of those characteristics that we paid particular attention to is the tendency for all of us to be subject to moral drift. It wasn't something that we talked a lot about when I was a cadet or when I was on the faculty at the Air Force Academy. But so it just wasn't something, it was there, it just wasn't something that we talked about. So as we explored this concept of human nature and moral drift as a characteristic of human nature, we made a connection between moral drift and moral injury, because moral misconduct, whether it is your own moral misconduct or moral misconduct that results in actions that are visited upon you, can result in moral injury. What we have recently connected to is this concept to research. It's research coming out of the VA and also out of the medical community that connects significant moral injury over a long period of time to increased incidences of suicidal ideation. And so we're continuing to work to explore those connections. Well, the other part of going back into the Western philosophical tradition was to build our education program on a solid foundation, and not everybody becomes very philosophical when they go to the bar, have a couple of beers and turn over the napkin and start scratching out theories of how to solve problems. And we didn't want to be accused of that, although there was some of that, certainly. So we eventually plotted on a dual axis model, moral drift and operational success. And what that does is it gives you 4 quadrants. Everybody knows about 3 of the 4 quadrants, but the beauty of the model is that in the upper left quadrant, you have high moral drift with positive mission outcomes. And that is an unseen quadrant. Until you put the dual axis model up there, people largely assume that there are only 3. So the 4th quadrant becomes the real problem. And that's the quadrant in which you have a culture of getting away with it. This culture of, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And if you get caught, you ain't trying hard enough. This concept of valuing competence over character. And so subsequently, once we identified this real problem, we have been teaching it in our courses at JSOU and getting feedback from the students of, hey, does this quadrant exist? And now how do we attack and minimize the effects of that kind of behavior? And we are asking for the students who come through our courses to help us with that, creating solutions to those types of problems, because therein is the value of education, right? If we can spur them to create the solutions, we can help spread the word. We can help them think through the problems. We can help them spread the word. But at the end of the day, all of this is directed, 1, at the individuals on the ground, at those guys in the team room, at the people who support them, layers out, all with this idea that how SOF does what only SOF does is of critical importance to the individual and to the nation, and most importantly, to the trust that the nation must have in order for SOF to be true professionals and true servants of the nation.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Thyne. I think that's incredibly insightful, and I think one of the biggest things we talked to our cadets here about trying to bridge the gap. So when it comes to ethics and ethical decision making, the gap that you have is you have moral understanding and moral intent, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily bridge the gap to the action that's actually carried out by the individual or perhaps the group based on the culture, if that type of action is condoned, right? And so we talked in class with our MS4s, our seniors here, about how to close that gap. And I think one of the key things is accountability and how that's built and baked into the culture of SOF as professionals. And I think a quick vignette would be how the Ranger Regiment incorporated what they call the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program 2, RASP 2. It used to formerly be ROPE, Ranger Orientation Program. And so what they did was pretty much at every key developmental level, you didn't just pass RASP the first time and you were a Ranger in the Ranger Regiment. Beyond the scope of a staff sergeant at the squad leader level, if you wanted to be a platoon sergeant, a first sergeant, or a sergeant major, or as an officer, which typically would PCS and then try to come back like myself, all 3 times that I went to the Ranger Regiment, I had to assess first. If you leave the organization for more than 6 months, regardless of who you are, and that happens, from private to E5, they do the RASP 1, but the RASP 2 is staff sergeants and above to come to the regiment the first time, but then also to assume key developmental positions. And I think that culture of accountability that not just includes, are you broken? Can you still run 5 miles? It was more about taking care of the person going through the process, sitting them down with a psych and going back through a psych evaluation, going in front of a board of senior leaders in the organization that knows you, knows your background, knows who you are. They know the value that you bring to the organization, but they also know and understand the type of person you are. They solicit the feedback from peers. They solicit feedback from leaders. They listen to the psych evaluation, whether you're high risk, issues that may be going on. And it's not to just raise red flags and eliminate people from the selection process. It's actually intended to identify folks that we would want to retain in the organization, but may also need help. It may be going to Center for the Intrepid or some other type of, medical needs that they may have, whether it's TBI related or some type of physical therapy that's required to get them back on track so that they can lead well, both physically and with their experience in those positions. So I think a culture of accountability is pretty paramount to what you're talking about, because some of those things, when you have that moral drift, the group doesn't allow it because the culture doesn't allow it. And so if you have one individual that's starting to fall out of line, ideally you have peers and people within your team that's going to snap you back in that circumstance. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. And we drew much the same conclusion, that the selection processes, the assessment and selection processes in place are selecting and training the right people. There aren't vast numbers of people or even small numbers of people slipping through who are people of bad moral character. But the SOF environment is unique and peculiar in many ways. And one of those ways is the ethical demands on an individual. We show a slide that says, you know, if these are the ethical problems that anyone will face over the course of their lifetimes, we educate and train those people through compulsory education. People practice a formal religion. We put our kids on sports teams so they can learn to win graciously and lose graciously when that happens. We also put them in scouting activities. But then we make the point that SOFs, the demands of the SOF environment, the ethical demands are like this. So they're a much bigger circle. So we have to, as passionate educators and supporters of those SOF professionals, we owe them the kind of training that you're talking about. We need to give them a language to talk about. I'm not sure that was the right thing to do without looking like they're questioning your integrity or calling you unprofessional or saying, I don't want to serve with you. It's not that. As I've learned from my colleagues, you guys will go to a shoot house and stand up above everyone and critique each other to death. But when it comes to moral types of slippage, drifting, if you will, we kind of look the other way because those are conversations we're uncomfortable having. We don't want to have them. But our point is we have to. Your point is we have to. So we have to create a culture where that's what we do. And give people a language to just say that without anybody getting too offended. Because if you're pointing out that my slip is showing, I might be a little hurt, I might be a little offended, but eventually I ought to know you well enough to know that you have my best interest, the team's best interest. And we can have a further conversation about why you gave me that feedback and how you can help me fix it and get back on track. So exactly the kind of stuff that you're talking about. So I'm heartened to hear it, and I will pass that along, certainly.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I think you talked about trust in your comments as well, and I think that that goes both ways, right? It's as a professional, we want to maintain and continue to earn the trust of the people that we're serving with the service that we're providing for the nation. But I also think that the trust, when you're talking about this, moral drift and everything, part of that trust is trusting people around you to pull you in if you do drift and if you have issues, that you're comfortable reaching out and asking for assistance, and you can take constructive criticism without getting defensive, because overall we all want to be better, right? And
absolutely. We ask the students frequently to give us to look at themselves, because how do you get better? You have to self-reflect. That's part of improving as a leader and or as a person, really. But we ask them, what do people need to know about you to share, to report ethical infractions or ethical missteps to you? Because that's a huge part of it, right? Is you can't fly off the handle or want to kill somebody or ruin their careers, if you will, this zero defect mentality, when people are just out there facing situations they haven't been adequately prepared for. That's part of our responsibility as leaders and educators to help prepare them. And we have to own part of that without putting everything in their rucksack.
Yes,
Thanks.
ma'am. I think that's a great point, because some of that training isn't necessarily saying I got your back when you're in a stack going into a room. It might be in the team room and someone's struggling coming back from deployment or dealing with some stuff personally that, I talk to the cadets all the time about saying, hey, you're going to be asked to do things that you may look at it and say, hey, this is not in the job description. These are things, when it comes to being life coaches and financial advisors and all of the other hats that you wear as a professional in the military, that includes SOF. And it's also an understanding that everybody comes from different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so the baseline can be different for many folks. So how do you incorporate people into a culture and help them understand that up front so that when they arrive to the unit and the organization, they understand the values and what that organization stands for. So I think that's a really great point.
Yep, you're here.
All right, so we're saving the best for last on the prepared questions. We got Sergeant Major Braese. You're a member of the German SOF community, but you've been extensively involved with a number of U.S. SOF units over the years. In fact, you're currently on a training mission with the 75th Ranger Regiment right now. So what are some of the best practices you've seen in terms of integrating SOF professionals from different nations? Over to you, Sergeant Major.
So first of all, thanks for having me. I feel very privileged and honored to be a part of this. I'd like to start out with a few things before I touch on the core of the question. I think it's absolutely imperative to understand the necessity of moving together. And I refer to this especially to what's going on right now in the world. And speaking of NATO, and we're all have to shake off some of our negative thoughts of and resistance of moving together. Over the years, I participated in several missions and several training missions with international forces, in particular with U.S. Special Operations. And it taught me a valuable lesson, and it mirrored how, in some cases, we have this distinctive thought how we can get together and practice uniform of actions in a certain way. And I understand there's certain things that prevent that, but it's really important that we understand that. And I'd like to touch a little bit on the culture aspect. So what I've learned over the time, especially working together on several occasions, it's important to understand the culture. So if, for example, the US and Germany, they've always been working together since 45. You were the first ones that turned around 180, shook off some of the prejudice that might have been at the time, which is plausible. And you started hand in hand helping us coming back up. And that type of culture kind of suit us together and over the years helped us to develop each other. And based of that experience, I think some of the SOF training we have nowadays, now I'm only referring to Fort Bragg or any other places we have this joint adventure, helps us to understand the mutual aspect of culture, which is very important. And becomes even more relevant at these times. A mutual understanding. So for example, I'm not only talking about language skills, I'm not only talking about how we run our TTPs or SOPs or anything. It's really, and it kind of feeds into what I just mentioned about culture. I need to understand how my counterpart thinks, what offends him, or what is okay to say, okay to think, how to communicate the right way, how to be a part of it, and not letting him think or the nation think they're somewhat subordinate in a more radical way, to express myself in a more radical way, kind of like we're better than you because our army is better and more educated and has more money and whatever. I've seen those constraints, especially when it comes to money and means and ways of how to train together a lot of times. And I've even experienced exercises, Grafenwehr Hohenfels, where we had like all these historically driven exercises running, like in the 80s we had Reporter, and now we have Swift Response, which is not necessarily the same, but it kind of feeds into the same thing with returning forces to Europe. And we now understand why, and we got to train together. We got to understand all that, how long it takes and everything. And it's like I said, right now, more than ever, it's very important to understand that. One of my most important core or feedbacks I've received over the years, and especially coming out of the trainings, was the level of critical thinking. Sometimes I hear that at West Point a lot of times, yeah, critical thinking. Okay, so, but what is it, critical thinking? Is critical thinking, oh, I have a new idea? Or is critical thinking, okay, what I read in the book, which, by the way, I can download, me as an adversary, I can download that book. I can download the Ranger Handbook on the internet. So now I know how you think. I know how you act. I know your TTPs and things of that nature. But the level of critical thinking I've experienced over the years, especially coming from different nations, was tremendous. It was an exciting experience to understand that the level of critical thinking, especially within the SOF community, is without boundaries. But at some point, it's limited by just means like, okay, money or opportunities, or especially we in Germany, we're sometimes just limited by political factors. And at some point, what I've seen downrange, operations couldn't be executed the way we wanted it to be because of political and other constraints. And to understand that, I have to find a way, which leads me back to my second point. I gotta make my counterpart that I work with, I gotta make him understand I can't do this because my culture, my military culture, my political culture doesn't allow me to do that. It's not because I, as the guy, don't want to do it, or I potentially not accepting the risk. It's more of that nature. And I think that like joint training missions help to give opportunities to discuss all that and to foster mutual understanding in this case. Some of my panel comrades spoke about lifelong learners and learning in particular. I believe because of joint operations or joint trainings within the NATO environment or similar environments, to be a lifelong learner is one of the core competencies every soldier, not only within the SOF community, every soldier should practice, because you cannot just be on a joint training adventure and step back and say, okay, this is how America does it. This is how the Polish does it. This is how whatever NATO country does it. But I'm not willing to adopt certain ideas and test it for myself. To give you an example, sometimes I'm a very passionate trainer and instructor, and sometimes I just watch a video and I try to look at it from different angles, and then I try it out myself. And then it's on me to deem whether it's practical and applicable or not. And if it's not, I want to know why not, and then I can further investigate that. And I deem that to be the part of learning experience, and then to learn whether it's an option or not. But that is then on the national side, with all the constraints, with or whatever hinders me to carry on that thought, and only during those training missions I'm able to experience that, because I only have what I have in Germany, and I can only experience that. And certainly there is a revolving thought, and hey, this is how you can do it, this, and this is how you can do that. But it's still within the country. It's still within your little community you're working within. But then for example, when I worked with Americans, whether it was the Rangers or the Special Forces groups, there was always another thought, another advice I could learn, and that inspired me to go that route. I think that all leads to the point of understanding effects. If I understand that this is what I can do, this is what my partner nation can do, I have this mutual understanding, which drives my learner's experience to the point that it helps me to refine certain skills, TTPs, SOPs, whatever there may be. It helps me to understand what are now on the national side, the second and third order effects, and also what are the effects in the international theater. And that all concludes into certain options or solutions, which I never would have thought about it if I hadn't been given the opportunity to work with partner nations and all of that. And it all, furthermore, fosters trust and competency. And I think that's what matters the most. And that was my biggest takeaway. And I remember times with the Rangers being in the shoot house. We at this time, we've never been together in a shoot house. And I know my guys' skills, and I know the Rangers certainly have tremendous skills as I've experienced them right now was with second time. But I never had any doubts. I never had the fear that something would go south. It was just a lot. There was just a lot of trust because I knew they're competent. I knew we were competent and we were professional. And I think that's what matters the most.
Hey, thanks, our major. Trust, character, competence, these themes keep coming out in this discussion. But as you were talking, one of the things I wrote down was focus on the mission. And you put it in I think a much more effective way of understanding the effects. I had the benefit of being a task force commander for a joint task force in Afghanistan, and one of the interesting things was I had no maneuver force that was actually assigned to me. I partnered with a bunch of partner forces from both allies, partners, and then the Afghans themselves, and it was a constant dialogue with our allies and partners of what capabilities they had, what capabilities we had, and then understanding the effects. How do we bring those capabilities to bear on the problem set when you layer all of the other challenges, when you have different authorities from different countries? You've got the trying to communicate on the people's network of Centrix versus SIPR versus Five Eyes and TS systems that not everybody had access to, but understanding all those limitations and really just looking at it as just one additional opportunity to jump over another hurdle to get after the enemy. And so the communication was definitely a key aspect of it. I do think sometimes it did get a little finicky because people would get frustrated with things when it was a capability that they knew you had that you weren't authorized to share, or information or intelligence that you may have had that you weren't necessarily able to share. Our goal was always to push it down as much as we could and as wide as we could to make sure that we had that shared understanding that you talked about early on. So a follow-up question for me is just, maybe a little bit of it was the mindset. You had some folks with a little bit of hubris when it comes to the haves and the have-nots, but how did you personally negotiate some of that stuff when you had different elements working together, hopefully focused on the mission and trying to get that end state accomplished? But can you talk through the challenges that you faced and how you overcame it?
Well, I would say there's the OG way, as we call it in the German army. So if you need to get things done, you get things done. And then you just don't talk about it, how you got it done, to the benefit of the mission. Not saying that it's like an illegal action, but a lot of times I've experienced that there's two ways. There's the way operators work together we're very focused on, we need to get this mission done, and we got to do everything to get it done. And sometimes it is very difficult, but it's mostly because of the equipment we are using or other nations are using, and how to synchronize the equipment properly, that everything is functioning. I see more of a problem more at the higher echelons where it gets a little bit more political, where it gets a little bit more difficult in finding a common solution. I think on the execution level, we will always find a way, but it has to be backed up with the right means and ways. And speaking of legality, I mean, what we do is legal. But if, for instance, if I get on a bird on a U.S. helicopter, and I have to be on that helicopter because I'm carrying a part of equipment I can only operate. But in this case, the Americans need that to be operated, and that makes me jump on their bird. But we haven't been requested permission for me to fly in a U.S. bird, then it's just a bureaucratic act that we have to overcome. And this is why I referred to higher echelons. They need to understand to deconflict the complexity of some of the problems we have. And sometimes it's just an easy nut crack and say, okay, look, he flies in his own helicopter. We're all on a joint mission or a joint training adventure. And things like liability, insurance, and things of that nature, that has to be it must not be as complicated as it is. And I remember times we worked with the Rangers in 2015. I mean, to fly inside a helicopter without seating had to be pushed up to a general's level. I mean, being serious, I have to ask a general why I'd take him out the seats out of a CH-47 to better the training and to make sure we're all operational and we can execute a mission which we would do the same way downrange. I think a general has something better to do than to make those exciting decisions. And I think those are the little things where I say this has to be decomplicated, so to speak, that is, if that is even a word. But yeah, those are the experiences I've made. And I think it's really important that the higher echelons understand to move closer together, we have to fight bureaucracy and certain boundaries we might have established over the years.
And that's a great comment, Sergeant Major. I know during my time in that task force that I served in, we specifically made declassifying information down to the lowest level a battle drill, because everybody in the task force knew once we got a piece of intel, the first question I was going to ask somebody in the JOC was, who can I share this information with? It's General Mattis's book, Call Sign Chaos. He talks about his 3 rules of the staff. What do I know? Who else needs to know it? And have I told them? Oftentimes the force that we were trying to enable was not wearing American patches. And so the challenge there is, really it all came back to trust, sitting down with a commander and saying, hey, there's a red dot on this house. I can't necessarily tell you how the red dot got there, but we have this joint mission. We have this, network we're trying to take down. We have this person we're trying to get after. And, that house with the red dot would be a good place to visit tonight, and looking someone in the eye and a force putting themselves in harm's way just based on a conversation where you're telling somebody there's a red dot on a house. It's incredibly humbling. to know, you've built that trust with another human being on the other side of the globe that's willing to put people out in harm's way and just get the mission done. But sometimes, like you said, that's the way you just got to do it is make it happen. It's great. So we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left. We've got through every panelist on the questions and some follow-ups. There's some questions in the box that I wanted to hit on the comments, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. So it looks like we've got about 4 or 5 questions. So first one from Antonio, it says, facing the challenges of the 4th age of SOF, which educational areas would you prioritize for the SOF professionals at short and medium terms, and which major challenges would you introduce in the current system? So if anyone wants to jump on that one, it does talk about curriculum. So Dr. Thyne, if you want to jump on in there, and then we've got our capstone professor there up at West Point with Ken.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Under the leadership of Dr. Ike Wilson, who you will hear from shortly, JSOU is undertaking revamping its curriculum, and it was identifying gaps in where we are and where we think we need to go. So we have established and are working to develop and field by the start of the next FY 5 learning pathways: SOF leadership and the SOF professional ethic. So these are the 5 big areas: SOF support to design-based integrative campaigning and support to statecraft, resistance and resilience, strategic influence and information advantage, and then strategic intelligence and emergent technology. So to the extent that those sort of broad goals, long-term and medium-level goals, can be articulated and attacked, we are doing so with a vengeance at JSOU under Dr. Wilson's leadership.
That's great. Ken, you got anything to add?
I do. And from a West Point perspective, and just looking at through our 4 fields of military expertise, I would say that the geocultural political field of military expertise is where I think, we really need to focus. Kind of going back to what the Sergeant Major talked about, is we're really living in an unrivaled complexity with regard to the operating environment. We're facing hybrid threats. We're operating in that gray zone below the threshold of open armed conflict quite frequently. And we need leaders out there that understand the operating environment. Today, if we look back into the 40s and in the 50s, we had a lot of special operators that were 1st or 2nd generation Americans that had lived in other countries, that grew up speaking other languages. And we don't have as much of that today. So that big picture and that geocultural political understanding, I think, is one area in which we really need to focus in order to understand the operating environments in which we're going out and we're expecting individuals to go out and into and solve complex problems that are a bit foreign to them.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. It says, where is the linkage of simultaneous education from career leaders to those who are entering the service? The focus of the discussion is on SOF junior leaders being ready for mission command and being able to apply critical thinking skills and making independent decisions. Yet you reference how the current leadership grew up in an environment of super jocks, a high level of centralized control, and the ability of their leaders providing input. How do you simultaneously deprogram career leaders to get out of their previous experiences while preparing SOF junior leaders for the future? I think that's an incredible question because, I'll just throw one example out there. I sat in the audience of a talk of a senior leader in the Army describing what LSCO, large-scale combat operations, was going to look like in the future. And by talking about the future, he was talking about, hey, if you haven't done LSCO, if you haven't fought Ivan in the box in the 90s like I did. And while there's probably some partial truth in that, trying to look back even before the GWAT, you know, there's certainly some things that you need to talk about there with near peer, and some things that folks would say we've allowed to atrophy by changing how CTCs are running with regards to coin versus LISCO, and how we've made some changes there. But I think to dismiss the 20 years of the GWAT and what junior leaders have learned and grown up in that environment, one of the reasons why I had my cadets in the Ohio State program read Team of Teams is to help them understand, when everybody says we need to do multi-domain operations, there has been organizations, or have been organizations in the past for really the last decade and a half, that have been doing multi-domain operations overseas. And to understand that while it's different in scale, learning it at the junior level is pretty, you know, pretty easy, because you're given certain resources and you learn how to integrate that at the tactical level. But does anyone want to touch on like operational and strategic when it comes to that question? How do we deprogram folks that might be, you know, kind of set in their ways? I know Sergeant Major talked about being lifelong learners, and part of that has to be self-reflection, self-awareness. But anyone want to take that one on?
Mike, I just throw out there that I don't know if it's necessarily as problematic for the SOF community as it would be for the conventional force, because of the level, like the great level of trust that we have for our fellow SOF professionals based on the competence. We're more willing to accept risk within, I think, the SOF community than the general purpose forces or conventional forces are. So while I'd say it might still be somewhat of a, you know, concern at some levels, I think it is a much less so within our community than it is in the general purpose forces. But interesting, like you said, I mean, the individuals that are currently those battalion commanders are individuals that have come up through the GWAT, where they've always had access to Blue Force Tracker, and they've had those super jocks, and to be able to deprogram that. And I think, you know, the training centers, National Training Center, JRTC, have really worked to transition, you know, those battlefields where individuals, you know, organizations are having to jump talk, and they're taking away some of those capabilities and making them fight in a degraded manner. However, we traditionally don't deploy entire battalions, you know, SF battalions or Ranger battalions to go support those operations at NTC or JRTC. We're doing it at the smaller levels. So I think it is very important to deprogram that, but I think it's less problematic for SOF, because I think we traditionally have employed that concept of mission command based on the trust and competence that we have for our SOF professionals.
Hey, thanks, Ken. I think that was a great response. And as I'm watching this clock tick down at the end of March Madness here, my shot clock's about to run out. So I just personally, I wanted to thank all the panelists. I want to thank JSOU for this opportunity to be able to moderate this panel of professionals. You wouldn't be a professional if you were dialed into this, seeking that self-improvement by being a part of this forum. So I really appreciate that. And as we see some folks dialing in for the next one, you know, the authority stuff, I think, is an extremely complex problem that the next panel is going to discuss. But I'm excited to hear what they have to say. How do we kill people with a Hellfire at the lieutenant colonel level, but sometimes it takes a 4-star to approve dropping a leaflet? So with that, the buzzer is going off, but I really appreciate the time. Thank you again to the panelists for taking the time to dial in, and I will hand it back over to Charlie Faint and the team back up there at West Point. Thank you.
Okay, and that concludes our 5th session. Mike, to you and all your panelists, thank you for a great discussion on the topic of SOF professionalism.